Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, and I'm going to talk to you now about a bunch of wonderful little pieces that you probably don't know as well as you might want to. I'm talking about miniatures for piano and orchestra, little concertos, little single movement pieces, the kind of stuff nobody plays anymore, if indeed they ever did. No, they really did. These are all pieces that were written basically in the 19th century, and they all feature piano and orchestra, but not as the usual concerto, big, grand concerto. Because, the time was, back in the day, that concerts did not consist of maybe an overture, a big concerto, then a big symphony. That wasn't how it worked at all. They were potpourris. They were a selection of all kinds of stuff. Most of them would have a singer. Most of them would have soloists. They would play arias and short works and excerpts of symphonies and favorite movements of things. They were much more like Pop's concerts than, the kind of symphony concert we're used to today. And I have to say, and I mean this in all seriousness, I think today's concert life is incredibly unhealthy. It is more and more limited. It is more and more boring. It's more and more the same crap all over again, one time after another, the same limited repertoire. And the person I blame for this, I have to say, is Bruckner. No, seriously. That's one of the people I blame for it. But I call it the Bruckner syndrome. The idea that there has to be some bombastic, colossal symphony on the second half, and you have to have a famous soloist to bring the audience in for the first half, and they have to play a concerto that's at least 30 minutes long. Well, there's no point. There is a ton, I mean a ton of music written that lasts between 5 and 15 minutes, written for solo and orchestra, which you will never, ever, ever hear in concert. Never, because first of all, you have to have soloists willing to learn it. And if they know it, no one will hire them. You have to have orchestras willing to play it, that is, who will hire the music, and a conductor willing to conduct it, who's also willing to learn it, and, learning to play a little 15-minute or 10-minute concerto sniglet doesn't earn any conductor a wide degree of acclaim. And of course, these days, when conductors just gallivant around the globe well, now nobody's gallivanting because we're having COVID. So they're all doing Zoom things. I mean, you would think that Zoom things would be more interesting because nobody can have an actual concert. Maybe they do some unusual repertoire. No, it's even worse. It's the same old crap, only more so. It's horrifying. Because they don't know any better. They don't know anything else. Conductors these days, they learn their Mahler symphony, their Bruckner symphony, their couple other big symphonies by Tchaikovsky and Brahms and Beethoven, and then they go from place to place to place doing their year's worth of repertoire. The same program over and over and over with every orchestra under the sun that they can get a job with. And that's what they do. They're not going to learn, wonderful little pieces. And because that's the way the world works nowadays, they don't have the rehearsal time. They don't have the rehearsal time to do any of this music. So there's no incentive for soloists to learn it. There is no incentive for orchestras to play it. No incentive for conductors to conduct it. No incentive for orchestra managers to put together interesting programs. I mean, you could take 2 or 3 or 4 of these pieces and make a wonderful concerto-length program full of absolutely entrancing music that no one knows. And I'm going to tell you what they are. I am limiting myself. Let's see. I've got 1, 2, let me see here, 3, 4, 5, is it 5? Yeah, 6, 7. 7 different composers who wrote pieces of the type I have in mind. And they ranged from actual little concertos or concertstucken, as they were called in German, concert pieces, to little tone poems, there's just an infinite variety of this stuff that some of it even used to be played fairly recently, and you'll see what I mean when we get there. And you don't hear it anymore. because these pieces are just too small, or they're too short, they're not substantial enough, they don't make the grade. People only want to hear blockbusters, or the certified handful of tiny masterpieces. And the irony is that on disc there has never been better choice, more choice. There's more stuff out there than there ever has been before. But in concert, life is getting more and more restrictive and uninteresting. I don't even want to go to concerts anymore half the time. I have no interest in artists. I'm only interested in repertoire. And if the repertoire is the same all the time, I'm not going to go. I'm not normal that way. I understand. I really do, because they can pack them in for a famous artist, or for a Tchaikovsky or a Beethoven symphony still. Mahler symphony, everyone's going to go. I'm not interested. I want to see some imagination in programming, but that's because, I'm coming from a different place. And so I understand that that's just hopeless curmudgeonliness, But let me start talking about this music, because it's wonderful, wonderful music. And I would love, you want to do something historical, folks? Let me just tell you, you hipster people, you want to do something historical? We do it sometimes. You recreate a historical concert. Why not recreate a season? Seasons back in the day also were pretty short. The Paris Conservatory Orchestra season was like 10 concerts. That was it. The Vienna Philharmonic, still, it's just, a couple dozen concerts in a very short period. Then they all go do other things. There's no reason why you can't reproduce some of these wonderful, wonderful events that premiered major masterpieces, that had wonderful soloists and fabulous singers running around performing these works. I think it would be fun. And I would go, and I'll bet some of you would too, assuming this COVID thing ends eventually and we can go. But let's talk about, this is all, the point I want to make is that this is all music by major, major composers that nobody plays. People just don't play it. Go figure. So let's start at the beginning with Chopin. Now, Chopin was never one to write a lot of music for the orchestra. And indeed, his shorter works for piano and orchestra can be played without their orchestral parts, and that was something that most composers of the day did. If you were a pianist, then you could just play the thing without the orchestra. If you were a violinist, you could play the orchestral part with a piano. You always had an option so that you could perform whether or not an orchestra was available. But if one was available, it was always nice to do the whole baloney there, the whole thing. Listen. Chopin wrote, of course, 2 piano concertos, which we have not talked about yet, but we will. But here, this wonderful little Phillips twofer featuring Claudio Raul and Eliyahu Inbal, you hear his other works for piano and orchestra, of which there are 4. And some of them are, the first one, the variations on La Ci darem la mano. La Ci darem la mano from Don Giovanni? La ci darem la mano, da 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 da. Right? The little duet there. His Opus 2. It's about 20 minutes long. It's a very serious piece for piano and orchestra. It's more famous in the version for piano alone. But here you go. Then there's Krakowiak, the Concert Rondo, Opus 14, which is fun. And there's the Andante Spianato and Grand Polonaise Brilliant in E flat, Opus 22. Again, very well known as a concert solo, a piano solo piece. Not so well known in its version for orchestra. So, there's something new to learn, isn't there? And finally, the Fantasy on Polish Airs, Opus 13. These are 4 wonderfully fun pieces. And if they're not, the deepest, most profound pieces, well, I got news for you. Most concertos aren't the deepest, most profound pieces either. They're just longer. And these are wonderful, wonderful works that don't get performed in concert. You find them on recordings. And one of the reasons I've sort of had, you're going to see like boxes of things, because you find these things as couplings. They're attached to other things. They're never featured events. And it's a shame, because you should sit down and take some time and savor them. And it doesn't take a lot of time. So what's not to enjoy? Now, here's another one. Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn wrote at least 3, I believe, short pieces for piano and orchestra, in addition to the two major piano concertos and the early piano concerto and the concerto for piano and violin, all of which, are his earlier concertos. But in addition to the two numbered piano concertos, there is the Capriccio Brillante, Opus 22, and the Rondo Brillante, and the Serenade and Allegro Giocoso. Does anyone know that? When was the last time you heard the Serenade and Allegro Giocoso by Mendelssohn for piano and orchestra? But they're wonderful. They're lovely, lovely pieces, incredibly entertaining, beautiful. There's no reason not to listen to them. And of course, if you have the recordings, this was the big Mendelssohn box on BIS that has all the symphonies, concertos, and including the string symphonies, and these short works. And my goodness, they're wonderful. I mean, they're just delightful. And so, go figure. Then let's talk about Schumann. We all remember him, remember? Went insane, wound up in an asylum, had 8 kids, married his piano student. That Schumann. The one who made my father turn green and drool because he hated having to play the music so much. That Schumann. So Schumann wrote, of course, the piano concerto. But there is also the Concertstuck Opus 92, otherwise known as the Introduction and Allegro Appassionato for piano and orchestra, and another Concertstuck Opus 134, which nobody listens to. And, Rudolf Serkin recorded all of this stuff. This is all of his music for piano and orchestra on one handy Sony disc, some imported from somewhere. Esprit, I guess it must have been France. And it's with the Philadelphia Orchestra in Normandy, the Cleveland Orchestra with Zell, and yo, wow, baby, yummy, right? Schumann, fabulous. A composer who we normally think didn't write very much after the piano concerto for piano and orchestra. Well, they're major works. They're substantial works. They're just not long works. So that's Schumann. Now we come to Liszt. Now, these are the Leslie Howard Liszt music for piano and orchestra. How much music for piano and orchestra do you think there is by Liszt? There's a lot more than you are aware of, believe me. Most of us, we only know the 2 piano concertos, neither of which are very long, by the way. The second's longer. It's like 20, 25 minutes. The first is quite short. It's about 20 minutes. But Liszt also wrote wonderful short pieces. There's the fantasy on motives from Beethoven's The Ruins of Athens. There's the Totentanz. Of course, the Totentanz gets recorded a lot. It's so much fun. When was the last time you heard it live? I've never heard it live. I've never seen it programmed in a live concert. And I love the Totentanz. And there's actually 2 of them because it's Liszt. There's a long one and a shorter one. But the famous one that begins bum, 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 ba, da, 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 with the Dies Irae, that Totentanz. I mean, it's absolutely thrilling, but it's only 15 minutes long. Nobody pays attention to it. Then there are concerto-length things here. There's a Grand Fantasy Symphonique from Berlioz's Lelio that's half an hour long. But there's the Malediction, the curse for piano and strings. Another piece, 15 minutes long. No one's ever going to play it. He orchestrated Hexameron. Who knew that? Hexameron, that was that compilation of, 6 or 7 composers all doing variations on a tune by Bellini, wasn't it? From I Puritani or Norma, or I don't know, one of those Italian things. And then there's he orchestrated Weber's Polonaise Brillante for piano and orchestra. And then in volume 2 here, which has 3 more discs, oh my God. Well, there's this De Profundis, which is an instrumental psalm, which is 36 minutes long. The orchestration of Schubert's Wanderer Fantasy, 21 minutes. Absolutely marvelous. There's the other Totentanz, which is a little longer, the De Profundis version, which is 17 minutes. The Fantasy on Hungarian Folk Melodies, 16 minutes. Marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. So, Liszt, of course, is a whole sort of world unto himself. His music is extraordinarily interesting, if not extraordinarily successful always. But just think of all of these wonderful choice pieces and imagine what kind of a program you could put together. How about starting with, the Schumann introduction and Allegro Appassionato and finishing with Liszt, like two composers who hated each other. Well, Liszt didn't hate anybody, but people hated him. And, just imagine, you could really have some fun with this in programming. The other composer who wrote wonderful, wonderful, wonderful music for piano and orchestra, short works, was Saint-Saëns. And nobody pays attention to Saint-Saëns. Here, Louis Lordy has done all of the works for piano and orchestra. This is the first disc, which actually has the two cello concertos, the Carnival of the Animals, and then the Caprice Valse, a.k.a. Wedding Cake. Wedding Cake, it's only 5 minutes long. It's delicious. That'd be a wonderful little intermezzo between the Schumann and the Liszt. Stick in Saint-Saëns' Wedding Cake. It would be wonderful. Then there's Africa. Africa, his exotic fantasy for piano and orchestra, which is only 9 minutes long. And then there's the Allegro. It's on another disc I have over here, but it's the Allegro Appassionato, another Appassionato. Appassionato is a popular title. And the Rhapsodie d'Auvergne, as in, songs of the Auvergne, is the Rhapsody d'Auvergne for piano and orchestra. When was the last time you heard those pieces? In a concert. I mean, if you collect records, of course you have them. How often do you play them on the records? You have all 5 Saint-Saëns piano concertos. You're going to listen to Africa? Well, you should. Africa's great. It's terrific. The Rhapsody d'Auvergne is great. They're wonderful, wonderful pieces. Next, of course, these are 2 sort of mini concerto-like pieces, kind of, well, not really, but one of them is anyway. Weber's Concertstuck. Now, Weber's Concertstuck used to be a repertory piece. I actually saw Alfred Brendel play it. It was amazing. It was fabulous. It's a great, great piece. It's a programmatic piece. It tells a story. It's in 4 little teeny movements. It's 16 minutes long. That's why nobody plays it anymore. But, it's about a chatelaine, which I guess is a lady of a chateau who's worried about her husband, the prince. He's off to battle. She hallucinates and has horrible, horrible dreams of his being killed and on the field and stabbed and mutilated and dismembered, and she's very upset. Then she sinks into melancholy. Then in the distance she hears that triumphant music of trumpets and drums. They're returning from battle. He's alive. She's thrilled. She leaps up. Literally, the piano goes whoop. There's a glissando all the way up the keyboard. She goes whoop. There she goes. She's up. She jumps into his arms, and the 2 of them have an absolutely frantic reunion full of glittery piano stuff and triumphant scales and arpeggios and runs, and they're having such a good time. It's a wonderful, wonderful work. Just great. I mean, really great. And nobody pays attention to it. This is Benjamin Frith with the RTE Sinfonietta, conducted by Proincius O'Dwyn. I always manage to pick the ones with the names right here. You could go figure that one out. I don't speak Gaelic, whatever, It's okay. He knows how to conduct. And Benjamin Frith is a very good conductor of this repertoire. He's done all the Mendelssohn piano music. He sort of specializes in music of this period, and he's made some beautiful recordings for Naxos. And this is really a fun record. This also has the Liszt version of the Polacca Brilliant for piano and orchestra, which is 9 minutes long. But, 16 minutes and 43 seconds of Concertstuck. And you cannot buy a performance in live concert these days. People just don't do it. It doesn't sell, I guess. But finally, however, my ultimate piece of small concert music, which is really a genuine masterpiece that used to be immensely popular, and it has completely disappeared as far as I can tell from concert stages. The greatest pianist in the world did this piece. And now no one touches it because it doesn't slot into our bombastic, pretentious, cheap, lazy, musically indifferent approach to concert programming these days. And I'm talking about César Franck's, his symphonic variations. It's another piece. It's 15, 20 minutes, 18 minutes. It's too short to be a concerto. But oh, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And my goodness, it's wonderfully grateful for the soloist. It sounds terrific. The performance I have here is Arthur Rubinstein, who's sort of his performances were kind of legion. It was the perfect piece for him, because he could relax a little and schmooze, but be incredibly brilliant where the music allows you to be. It's a wonderful performance. But it's a tragedy that we don't get to hear this stuff anymore. It really is. I mean, I know I'm complaining. I'm having a rant a little bit here, but there is so much great music out there. And I'm not even talking about the literally thousands of short pieces by, concertstucken and, concertante pieces by composers we don't pay any attention to anymore. I mean, and there were a lot of many more of those than there are of composers we do pay attention to. And they're all being recorded. They've been recorded. They're on labels like CPO. I mean, they're enterprising young artists who, thank God, have learned this stuff so that they can make a record, which they can use as their calling card. It's, have you heard me do the Kalavoda concertstuck? Or something like that. There are all these short pieces. And for every instrument, not just piano and not just violin. I mean, there are these wonderful, wonderful little works for clarinet, for bassoon, for flute, and we don't hear them. We don't hear them. It's a crime that you cannot hear these things in concert, and that nobody is expending any thought or imagination to try and put together colorful, enjoyable, and somewhat unusual concert programs that include some of these works. It pisses me off. It should piss you off too. But at least you can get the records and you can enjoy the music. And so that's why I'm telling you about it now. Keep on listening, folks. These wonderful little piles of short little bonbons, little gems, just delightful. For piano and orchestra. And we'll do more of this. Don't worry. We're going to do violin and orchestra. We'll hit as many instruments as we can over time. But I mean, don't ignore these short pieces, especially by major composers who everyone's bitching that we don't have enough music from them. Well, yeah, if you'd only play it and listen to it, you'd find that we probably do. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you. Take care.